All right, guys, welcome back to another Wednesday night mixing live sessions at 7 p.m. sharp. I hope you guys are all doing really well. Let me know if you can hear everything okay, because the internet and OBS does strange things, and it's a lottery as to what works one day and what doesn't work the next day. I hope you are all well. This is my fourth live stream in my new series. I'm hopefully going live every Wednesday, 7 p.m. UK time, which I believe is 2 p.m. EST time. We're going to be mixing a variety of tracks. We've already done a beautiful acoustic song performed by Jesse Smith in the studio. That was a couple of weeks ago. And that was to showcase the Austrian Audio OC818 microphones and the Blackline Audio Revolution 2x2 audio interface review, which is coming soon. We've then had Simon Caviani in the studio as well, and we mixed that track last week, and we used some Waves plugins to demonstrate how we can mix a DI'd acoustic electric guitar on the session. Right, I'm just going through some show notes here for you. Feel free to leave your comments and suggestions and requests and questions in the comments, and I will be keeping an eye on all of those as and when I can. This week we have the drum parts from my song Angel. I've been trying to get this song done for ages. The first live stream I did was an overview of that mix session, which you will be able to see on screen in a moment. And we explored top-down mixing in that, and I explained what that was and went into quite a lot of detail of why we would use a top-down mixing approach versus going in and mixing and treating every single channel individually before listening to the whole thing overall. We'll mention it a little bit more in this video. So these drums have partially already been mixed, as I said in that overview video. I explained what I did to all the instrument groups, etc. But we're going to go into more detail in the mixing the drums in this video. So these drums were recorded at my friend Finn Lomax's studio. And he's just moved into a wicked new studio in West London. And he's got some beautiful analog gear, as you can see on screen now, that we recorded through, and some beautiful microphones. So the drums were recorded really well for this track, which I think does make a real difference. As hopefully you'll be able to hear. All right, I need to mention plugin of the week, which is the brand new Relight plugin from Tone Empire. If you don't know Tone Empire plugins, Tone Empire are one of my favorite plugin brands. They're certainly in my top 3 for two reasons. One, they are so easy to install. It's mind-boggling. It's brilliant. Love them. And also, they genuinely sound really good. And Relight is their new plugin that's come out quite recently. Relight is a tape saturation plugin with a variety of adjustable parameters that we'll talk in more detail when I pull it up in the session. Now, you might be thinking, oh, another tape delay, but this has a lot of features to really hone the sound. And so far, I've tried it earlier, and it does genuinely sound really good. So that's good. Right, now, as you know, I don't use PayPal or Patreon. I don't ask for donations to support this channel, but if you would like to, you can use the super chat and super sticker feature, which will enable you to give a small donation to help me keep these videos coming out for you. Reviews weekly, well, nearly weekly, and live streams, and then my little clip series, which are the concise little clips that I take from these live streams once a week, just to give some tutorial content out there. So drums on their own, hopefully with no echo on my voice. So that sounds like a drum kit, and those audio sources sound pretty good. Now, yes, there is some master bus processing, but that's really just doing a very gentle EQ, very gentle multiband compression, bit of low end and top with the Pultec, a bit of stereo widening, a tiny bit of compression, and then a limiter, but I don't think we're going to be pushing into that. So if we solo our drum bus, I've got the Loch Ness V2, the first plugin from Tone Empire today. This plugin is absolutely fantastic. The Loch Ness V2 is a smash box, which gives us it's a heavy compressor and a crust which is saturation, and this is a setting I've arrived at which I really like. So that's on, off, And it can go really hard with that and drive it and make it nice and meaty. But I'm not going to overdo it for reasons I'll explain in a second. So that's the first plugin. So what that's doing is gluing all the drum channels together to start sounding like a kit and just adding some crunch to it. Next thing I've got is an EQ. And I've pulled out some difficult frequencies, particularly that one. 149, which was resonating a lot at 500. I'm not a fan of the mid-range on drum kits. Let's play with that though, because that might be too much. So you can hear without that reduction in EQ there's a lot of kind of woolly, honky middle range. And immediately that clears it up pretty quickly, I think you would agree. And a boost at 200. This is to bring out the body of the snare drum. And just a tiny boost there at what, like 90. Now this little peak at 90 here is probably going to change when I mix the bass guitars, because what I'll probably do is find where the bass is weak. For example, if it's weak at 90 hertz, then I can boost the kick drum. Or not weak, if it's naturally not resonating at 90. Or I may need to boost 90 on the bass, and then I would maybe reduce the kick drum at 90, just so they're doing basically the opposite. But that is another mixing session. So with and without EQ, without. It's subtle, but it's doing something. So Excalibur has asked, why not use a dynamic EQ? And that's a very good question. You've clearly watched this live stream before, because I use dynamic EQs on pretty much anything, let's say instruments, so vocals, guitars, keys. Really useful. The reason I don't use dynamic EQ on drums is I don't really feel like it needs it, because you're capturing an entire room. Yes, a drum kit is made up of multiple individual microphones, but the drum kit is effectively one whole instrument, therefore the room is a whole instrument. So there's going to be prominent frequencies and weak frequencies all the time, if you've got all the microphones open. At least that's the approach I take. Also, this is just a bit simpler. And I'll be honest, this Logic plugin is great for what it does. And then we have the Black V2, Black QV2, which is like a tube drive plugin, which adds some nice saturation. Let's hear it with and without. Without and with. Without. With. Oh, my loops. So again, it's subtle, and we might revisit this. We might take this off to further exaggerate the... In fact, I'm going to turn it off now, because I want to go through each channel, and we're going to bring up the Relight plugin in a bit, and I want to amplify that. So let's turn this off for now. Let's go and look at each individual drum. So what I've basically done on the master drum bus there is I've pulled out the general frequencies that I don't like. Now, we probably need to go into each individual microphone at this point and find things that are prominent and tricky that we want to work with. So let's get rid of the solo, the kick drum. So this is the kick in, which I believe was a Shure Beta 52, which I also have in my studio now. And you'll see I have no processing on there. First thing I would go for is an EQ. And, well, we don't need that, do we? Do we need some more slap on that? It's quite a slappy mic anyway, the 52A. So for the slap of a kick drum, 3.5 kilohertz to 5, maybe 6 kilohertz are kind of the slap attack frequencies. This mic's got quite a lot of this anyway, so I don't know if we need it. But let's just try that for giggles. Now, there's some low resonances annoying me there. Let's find those. Just a little bit there. And immediately that has spiced up the bass drum. The out mic at least. Let's have a listen without. All right, so that's cleared it up quite a bit for me, which I quite like. More questions. Good work on the question, guys. How do you isolate the toms in EQ? So we'll move on to that. Yeah, so bus processing, like an umbrella global processing, will then go into each microphone and EQ if we need to. But the idea of top-down mixing is to eliminate rough, vague global problems, so we have to do as little work as possible when we go into each mic. Ideally not have to. I mean, I quite like this drum sound as it is. It's very organic, but I do want to control it a little bit, as we're doing here with the kick drum. I want that to hammer a bit more in the low end. There we go. That's sounding good to me. But as always, let's listen to In Context with the other two mics. And you can barely hear it with the other two mics in. Let's look at the kick out. Honored help, wouldn't it? So with this mic, this was a condenser mic. I think it was a Aston Origin or Spirit. So I kind of want the woolliness from this mic. So I don't want to pull out too much middle end, middle range. And there's not too much low end going on. Let's have a listen to the top end. And I'm going to come back to this mic because I don't want to put any more top end in because there's plenty going on with the kick in. The kick tunnel mic. Oh. So that gets a whole load of the sound kit. A whole load of the full sound of the kit. Yeah. And I don't want to put too much top end in that because that's clearly capturing a lot of the cymbals. That was a ribbon mic, so that sounds nice and dark. Let's listen to those together now. Go into mixer view, and then I can easily mute these. So without EQ, without. All right, so I definitely want to go back into this middle kick out microphone and just ditch a few of these mids. There we go. Now, at this point, what I would do, instead of adding compression to individual tracks, that's going to add in a load of processing. What I want to do is send these three microphones to their own bus. So I'm going to click on the top one, press Shift, click on the bottom one to select all three. And we're going to, it's already assigned to drum bus 1, fear not, we will get around that. We are going to go to, let's start at 23 then. And we're going to label this, that's come up as aux 37. This is going to be kick bus. Kick bus. And then this bus we need to then reassign to bus 1, which is our drum bus. So the 3 drum mics are going to the 1 kick drum bus, which is then going to the 1 drum bus, if that makes sense. So there's a level system. So what I'm going to do to the kick drum bus is that's where I'm going to add some compression. Now, we're talking about Tone Empire plugins today, so let's go for the Model 5000, which is an API style compressor, and this thing just sounds great. It's a rock song, and we've even got kick presets. Not too fussed about that. Let's go full wet mix. Threshold's fine. 4:1 ratio is fine. The attack is quite quick. Let's go a bit quicker on the attack. And let's play with the release. All right, hello Exemption in the house. Thanks for joining us. All right, with and we're just doing kick bus compression right now. So with and without, without, and with. All right, and we can set auto gain as well, which is a really good feature of all the Tone Empire plugins. Great. I am going to turn that down a fraction though, take the makeup down a little bit because that will affect my mix. So when I'm bus mixing at this point, I am trying to be aware of the gain staging, which I'm trying not to hit higher than 5 on all of the drum bus, all of the individual drum bus channels. And then obviously that's going to the main bus. If we go over 5, I mean, I could go lower. We're not really giving ourselves much headroom. Let's go for -8 today. So this is just on the bus. This isn't on the master bus or in fact the umbrella drum bus. So I'm liking how that's sounding. Now, again, the point of top-down mixing is to apply compression on the drum bus to the overall kit, which the Loch Ness V2 is doing there. So I don't necessarily need to go into each instrument and do that, but for the sake of demonstration purposes, I will today. So I'm not going to add any reverb to the bass drum. There's quite an ambient room sound from the tunnel mic there. I'm not fussed about adding in any more compression, and I'm not going to do any more in terms of a parallel send at this stage. I would save parallel sends and global reverbs for the drum bus. So let's go down to the snare top. Let's have a listen to that on its own. That is what a top snare drum mic sounds like when it's not been sampled. No, it does not sound like that on the radio, because it's not been sampled. So what I want to do here is just pull out a few of those kind of honky resonances. And I'm going to put in a high-pass filter there to help filter out a little bit of the kick and just clean up some resonance and mud. And those honky frequencies, again, are probably going to be around 400 to 500, which I really dislike on the snare. All right, a bit lower. So that honky resonance, yeah, pretty much 300. I'm going to I've taken that out quite a bit, a reasonably narrow Q, because I don't want it to affect the rest of the drum. Without. And with. Now there's another frequency bothering, but I want to boost the 200 to 250 range is where the body of the snare drum is. It's also where the honk can be, as I suspect it might be here. Yeah, so I'm going for a bit lower on the snare drum to give it some body. And let's find out some more stuff to filter out, just for the sake of trying it. Nah. All right, and I've added some top end there just to get a bit more spank into the drum. I actually want to widen this Q. And the beauty of Logic is you can check individual frequencies by turning them on and off like that. So the reason I'm taking this out of the snare drum is because the drum bus compressor is only going to amplify that resonance. And I could do with another cue point. There we go. And yeah, there's nothing else really bothering me, but I want more of that out. So before and after. Much cleaner. Now, snare drum's a good one to bring in the Relight plugin. The new Tone Empire Relight plugin. All of the Tone Empire plugins are available for a free 15-day trial on their website. I'd urge you to go and try them out. They are genuinely the easiest plugins to install, and they sound great. They really do sound good. And now this is a setting I came up with just before the live stream session. Across the bottom here, we've got 6 different tape styles, and we'll audition those in a second. High pass and low pass filters. This lock feature is interesting. So whatever the input gain is, as you can see, I've got the input gain really hot here. That's not boosting the overall volume because I've got auto gain selected. The lock button means auto gain is on, so it'll just be one set gain that's going through to the output. Now the input gain is still affecting how much, in theory, this signal is pushing into the tape, as we can demonstrate here. So despite that being minus 24 dB input, it's the same volume, and it will be if I turn it up to plus 24 dB out input. But let's have a listen to how the input drives the saturation. So you can hear towards plus 24 there, you're getting that poppy crunch. And we then got output for obvious output sends. We've got the bias, which helps create the desirable saturation effect in addition to the input. I did notice this was very subtle when I tried this. So let's try that off. And maximum. But you can hear some gentle texture coming through with that, which I like. Comp, this controls the envelope of the sound, so it works similarly to a compressor, allowing the user to emulate the compression characteristics of tape. So if you drive a signal onto tape, the physical nature of how the tape responded would sometimes, it certainly curtails the peak transients. And this comp emulation is trying to do the same, and it gives you a balance of how much to curtail those transients. Let's try with and without. So on the snare drum, I don't necessarily want much of that because I want that peak transient. I want that attack. And if you notice towards the maximum end, it was kind of lifting up, flattening the peak transient and slightly lifting up the rest of the signal there, all the bleed from the kick and the cymbals. It's very subtle, that one, but I'm going to leave that there. And then we've got the crosstalk. So that just sounds like it's actually doing more of what I thought the compression thing would do, where it's flattening everything out a little bit more. And oversampling, which seems really popular in plugins these days. This helps minimize aliasing, which can affect the upper frequencies, and it can help affect the sound and apparently help it sound more realistic. Let's have a listen with it off. And up ×8. Off. Demonstration's not helped by the fact that there's 1 or 2 skew whiff snare hits there. All right, so let's go through the type of tapes that we've got here. I think I arrived at B was the one I liked for the snare. It's A. I don't know what these are meant to be emulating, by the way. Bit darker. Bit more toppy. Ooh, that sounds quite old school and neutral. I quite like that, but I think I preferred C. Yeah, C just sounds a little brighter, which I want from a top snare. And then we've got the slow and fast speed. Now, selecting between slow and fast speeds varies how many inches per second the tape is going through the tape machine, and this depends on which type of tape machine we have. To give you an idea of the types of tape machines this may be based on, we have the TCA 230. I guess that's a Telefunken M20. That'll be the Studer APX. That'll be the Studer A800. I do know that one, and whatever that is. And there's a few other presets there, and these all sound pretty good to me. So, yeah, I think let's listen to this with and without on the snare drum, because I think it's making a subtle but quite nice difference. So without. Slow speed, fast speed. I think I prefer the fast speed because it's a little bit brighter. All right, so what do you think of the Relight Pro? I like how that's affecting the snare there. Now, I did notice it's only available as a mono plugin. I did try this on the drum bus, but I don't want to send the drum bus into mono. So I've applied this to a couple of instances on the snare. Next thing to add is what have I added? A short reverb. So my magic number for snares is 3 reverbs. I have a short reverb to give it some weight, to give it some body. It's more felt than heard. And I've got the Universal Audio AMS reverb here, which is amazing. It's a reasonably short decay time, and there's a slight pre-delay there. I might tweak that as we go. Now, the second thing I've done, interesting, I've put that before. I would often do that before, is to to EQ my effects. I'm always EQing effects so that we're not adding reverb to mushy signals that we don't want, like all the low end. You know, we don't need 100 hertz getting reverberated around. That's just going to create a muddy mix. So first thing I always do with any effects is EQ them. And again, the Logic stock plugins are great for this because they're so low CPU intensity. So first thing I've done there is set the bus. And how I've done that is just gone bus and set up a bus. And that's come up as an auxiliary, which I've labeled Snare Rev Short. And I always set the sends to 0 unless I'm dealing with backing vocals, but I'll save that for the backing vocal video. So set up a bus, add in your processing, set the send to 0, and then we can mix the short snare reverb with the fader. I'll bring it in as we go. And without, with, I think I want to tweak that because I want the pre-delay a little shorter and maybe the decay time a fraction lower. So then I can have more of it in the mix without hearing the tail of the reverb. I just want this for the presence and the body. I think I'm going to go even shorter with that decay time. Let's go to 6. And that'll do. And the next reverb I have is a long reverb. Pretty self-explanatory. Again, find yourself a bus send, 17 in this case. Let's turn the channel on. Always, so I can double click on the circle there and press 0. Always have the send to 0 for now. And I've got a different reverb here. Again, I've EQ'd the reverb channel, taken the low end out to clear it up, and I've taken out some mid frequencies that were resonating. The thing to bear in mind with reverb is that adding reverb will amplify and affect the EQ of the lead instrument. And I'll demonstrate this in a second. But for now, I've got a long reverb. The EMT plate is fantastic. I've got the wet to dry signal set ratio set to full wet. Slightly longer pre-delay, I think, so we can get the peak transient out and then have the reverb coming in. It's quite long. We can go for 2 seconds. And there is a filter there at 180 as well. So maybe I don't need the channel EQ there, but I want that for a bit more control in the mid-range. Let's dial this in as we go, and I'm going to mute the first reverb so you can hear this in isolation. Oh, I really like that reverb. That is the EMT plate reverb from Universal Audio. So let's play with these EQs and you'll hopefully see what I mean in terms of them amplifying resonant frequencies I don't want. Now this might not be so prominent because I have taken some of these out of the snare mic. Let's try. So you can hear there, as I'm moving the EQ on the reverb, you can hear that coming out. So I don't want to amplify certain frequencies. It's quite a bitey sound at 300, that. But I do want to boost a bit of the tops because I want a bit more snap. Nice. And again, I can test all of these individually by pressing this button here, which turns each band on and off. So yeah, definitely want those out. A little bit wider. And obviously, this might seem quite extreme. It is, but there's enough for the reverb coming through these other frequencies. Let's hear it with and without. All right, so I might have overdone that a little bit. That's fine, it's for demonstration purposes. So, for those who've just joined, this is a reverb on, this is an EQ on the reverb send, which is our plate reverb here. All right, so let's add those two together. So this is a short reverb and a long reverb. One more reverb to follow. Without both. With the short. Subtle. Might turn that one up actually. With the long. And I'll probably take that one back in the mix. But again, reverbs and things are very mix dependent, but I don't want to reference check it just yet. So the third reverb we're going to do is going to be a gated reverb, just because I like gates. So I'm going to set up a new bus. I'm going to set that send to 0 by clicking on the circle and pressing 0. And this has gone to aux 38. So we're going to call this gated drum rev. That's my shorthand, so it's all legible when you get the mixer windows up. Okay, so we need some processing. Let's mute these two and let's find a good reverb, good gated reverb. I think I'm going to go back. Now, I wish Tone Empire had a reverb, but I reckon theirs is going to be amazing when they come out with that. If they come out with that. Let's go to the RMX16 again, because I think there's a good gated tom reverb. 80s toms, right? I know this one sounds insane. But in the context of a mix, with the other two, this is going to add some bite, and again, a little bit more body. I guess we could EQ this as well. Let's not do too much, and I'm going to bring that in. Just this reverb, I'll mute the other two. Now, the idea of this is to add thickness and texture. So this one needs to work in harmony with the long reverb, which is kind of going to take over when the gated reverb stops. And it also takes over from the short reverb when the short reverb stops. Yes, you could overlap just the two, but I've always found 3 reverbs sounds wicked. Let's have a listen. All right, just a tiny EQ tweak there because I wasn't too happy with how that was sounding on its own. Obviously, this is mix dependent, so let's have a listen to these in the context of the full drum bus. So we're listening for the snare reverbs here, okay? So short reverb. I've got guitar coming through that. Long reverb. And the gated reverb. All right, and if you're wondering why I've got guitar coming through there, that's because I have this assigned to the short snare reverb channel, which I changed earlier and I clearly forgot to save. Michael says, so 3 buses for the drums. Right, so let's work our way up. So I've got the 3 kick drums going to a kick drum bus. And I've got the 2 snare drums, or I will have in a minute, the 2 snare drums going to a snare drum bus. I'll then put all the tom mics to a tom bus, and all the cymbals to a cymbal bus, and the hi-hats probably to their own bus. And then all of those buses, the kicks, kick, snare, tom, hats, and overheads, umbrella buses, will then go to the drum bus, which will then go probably to a master music bus, which will then go to the master bus. It sounds complicated, and there's a lot of layers, but there are many reasons why we would do this, which hopefully I'll get across over the course of this live series. I go into more detail on this in episode 1 of this live series. All right, how are we doing for time? 1:45. All right, let's move on to snare bottom, because I use the relight again on this. So snare bottom, I've assigned this to the short snare reverb as well. Let's maybe clean up that EQ slightly. Bit of top end in there. Bit of body. Ooh. All right, I like how that 200 sounds there. So without EQ, snare bottom. With EQ. Without some resonance here. All right, it's subtle, but that's doing so much for me for the sound. Let's try with the relight. This is a setting I stumbled across earlier. Again, with and without. So without. And with the Tone Empire relight. Let's try some tape types. Ooh, I like that. Nope. Nope. That sounds good for a bottom snare. All right, so type A, type B, taped tape saturation there sounds very open, but I quite like the focus sound that E had. It's open sound and the closed sound. Let's put those 2 snare drums together. Oh, that makes a big difference. Okay, so I preferred the close sound, but in context with the other one, I preferred B. It sounds fuller, more open. All right, and let's take that gated reverb back a bit on the lead snare. That's a bit too much. And the long one a tad as well. So then at this point, I'm going to send these two to a snare bus, and then I'm going to add some snare compression to both channels. You could spank the top snare mic. I'm thinking let's just spank the top one while we're here. And the plugin for spanking is the Universal Audio Distressor. However, I want to talk about a Tone Empire plugin. And we're going to go back to the Model 5000. We can find a preset. Slam A. Start with that. Turn these reverbs off. Yeah, I'm not digging how those reverbs sound in isolation, but it's all about the context of a full mix. So that's smashed at 20-1. That's what I would go for similarly with the UAD Distressor. Quick attack, maybe a bit slower. Okay, auto gain is suggesting that that needs to be higher. All right. I'm liking that, but I can't. I'm just going to go back to what I know for this example, which is the EL8 Distressor. And this is just ferocious. So this is going to spank the top snare drum. And I usually go for gut smack. That's really opening that snare drum sound up for me. Now, the problem with using a compressor on the snare drum is obviously amplifying the hi-hats and the kick drum. Anything that's bleeding into the microphone is also going to get squashed and brought up to level. So you have to be careful with it. And that's one of the difficulties about mixing a drum kit is all the mics are bleeding into one. So if you EQ something, that might phase in another mic. If you compress something, that's going to make something overpowering. Especially with hi-hats, that's probably where I struggle the most. Getting a good hi-hat level once I've compressed everything and it's going into all the other microphones. So maybe we can go easy on the compression. Let's listen. Do we need it in the context of a bus mix? Let's have a listen to it without on its own and then in the bus mix. Now, obviously, that's just added a load of volume. So let's take that back a bit. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. All right, but let's in the context of a mix. So that's with the Distressor, without. Right, and you may have heard the flamming there. What that is my Apollo DSP units having to recalculate the alignment of all the plugins so there's no latency, which if I press stop and start again, will do automatically. And as I brought it in, yeah, you can hear it goes out of sync. Cool. I mean, that makes it sound pretty beefy. That might be on the, that might be a touch too much compression, but I'm not going to worry about that for now. Let's bring in those reverbs. All right, cool. Starting to sound like a drum kit. So from there, I would send these to a snare bus, and I'm going to include this channel here, which is my sample, which I'll explain in a second. So they're currently going to drum bus 1, or the full drum bus. Let's send these to the next one, which is going to be snares bus. And the kicks, we're going to bus 23, kick bus. Ron Vi, hello. What does flamming mean? Great question. Flamming is when it's a drumming term, which is when one note lands slightly before the other. So I'll do it on my chest. So this hand's going to accent, this hand's going to land slightly before, and you get this sound. If that makes sense, rather than two notes landing perfectly together, which would sound like... There's a slight gap. So if someone refers to, you know, the bass player and the drummer flamming, one of them's late or early. If you refer to two drum hits like the hi-hats and the snare drum not being perfectly in line, you get that flamming sound. So what I was referring to with the plugins was, because the way the Universal Audio stuff works, in terms of aligning the processing time it takes, there is a bit of processing time that goes on in the units. But it compensates for it. However, if you just turn a plugin on, it hasn't factored in that extra bit of workload. So it, until it catches up, it basically flams that signal. I hope that makes sense. Right, so they're going to a snare bus, and then we need to send the snare bus out to the drum bus. And I have to remember to do this, otherwise that makes it fun later when you can't hear snares. All right, so the toms... I'm going to send all these to a tom bus, and I'm probably going to process all these at the same time because I'm feeling a little bit lazy. So 27 tom bus. And then make sure we send the tom bus out back to the drum bus. So what we're doing here is all the 6 tom mics, we had tom, top and bottom mics on 3 toms. So 6 mics in total, 3 on top, 3 underneath. And now these are all going to one single tom bus that I'm then going to process. Partly because I can't be bothered going through and finding each, you know, sweet spot and dead spot resonances of each one. I possibly would do for the full final mix, but for now, I think we'll get away with just processing the umbrella tom bus. Now, having said that, as I think about this out loud, I've kind of done this already on the drum bus. I've processed the drum bus with some EQ, and I've pulled out a resonant frequency, and I've boosted a couple there. These will affect the toms, as Michael pointed out earlier. Tom bus, so toms. All right, tom bus. Now, I think this is probably just going to need EQ, but we'll put EQ and we'll put a reverb on as well. The thing is with this song is I'm not playing toms very often. Let's find a tom bit. So with the toms, usually people will go straight for a gate, because if I listen to the toms in isolation here, let's just listen to the tom bus. That sounds pretty naff. The reason that sounds naff is because all you're hearing is the drum heads resonating sympathetically to all the other drums being hit and the cymbals being struck. So you're getting that, you're hearing all the other audio, but you just, the majority of the signal is that, which is just the heads resonating sympathetically. So we want to get rid of that. There's 2 ways we can do this. We can do it with a gate, which is kind of the obvious logical solution. However, gates for me I find so fiddly to get right. And then, you know, if you have a tom hit that's not quite as strong as the others, that might not make it through the gate, so therefore won't be heard because the gate will keep it squashed. Or you might have a particular loud crash cymbal hit with a bass drum that then triggers the gate, and then all of a sudden you're getting like the odd cymbal jumping out, you know, coming through the mic, and I don't like it. So what I do is I manually gate stuff. The way I would manually gate these is I would go in and I would, let's just do it on one channel. So in Logic, I'm going to press T and I, which is my cutting tool. And I'm going to find a space that's reasonably far enough after a previous transient. I'm going to cut there. And then I'm going to let the fill play out. So let's have a listen to what the fill is here. Ooh, yeah, that's a good fill, that one. Okay, so this entire section now actually has toms in it. Now, what we could do is just do the entire section. And we could cut at the end there and then mute the rest of it. But I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to isolate this with one tom. So we've got one tom hit. Now, obviously, we've got a little transient there that's probably from another tom mic. So this mic is picking up another tom. So let's go there. So for example, I'm going to press T and T again to bring it back the pointer tool. I'm going to move that to just before that transient, that to just before that transient, that side just there, and then I'm going to press T and A, which is going to be my fade tool, and I'm going to fade out like that. So what that's doing is that's manually gating all the noise in between the tom hits. Yes, this takes ages. However, I think it's a much better, more accurate, more consistent result than using a gate plugin. And, you know, there are people you can pay to do this stuff for you. I'm not going to do that now because that is going to take ages. But that's how I would gate the tom mics. I mean, we can make it easy. For example, you know, there's a tom build up here. Oh, undo. Let's select all the tom mics. Zooming in, top one, shift the bottom one, selects them all, and I can hide them all until there. And then if we listen to the drums, so this was with no tom mics in. So you can actually use this process as an instrument itself, as a dynamic instrument. So I don't know if you could hear that. We'll listen to it again. Just going to shorten this tail here. But what happened there was when the big fill came in, the ga goom 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 goom, all of a sudden the dynamics of the kit lifted a bit because all of a sudden we've opened up these 6 microphones. Now you can open them just for the fill, or you could leave them open for that entire section and leave them ungated. So all these extra microphones are picking up all the extra sound of the kit. And yes, you are getting the tom resonance, which we could EQ out on the tom bus in a minute, but you're also getting that extra thickness. This would be the equivalent of mixing in a parallel compression send. And this is something I do for choruses, more so with guitars and maybe some distortion on a bass guitar, or I probably wouldn't do it to keys, and I might do it to vocals, where let's drag it up. This is my parallel drum bus. Let's turn that on. Let's press read. So there we go. So that's my parallel drum bus, and I'm going to press A to bring up the automation. Excuse me. So at the moment, the parallel drum bus is set permanently through the track at minus 12.4 dB. So I could automate that, for example, to be off, and then on that big drum fill start coming in. So for the next section, there's then a parallel, heavily compressed, maybe slightly saturated drum sound coming in underneath. I use this to create dynamics in tracks rather than just automating the master fader, because this adds texture and substance rather than just a blatant decibel change. But that's probably at the end of the video, and I'm aware this could become quite a long live stream. So let's get rid of that. A to get rid of the automation. I would manually gate them and maybe make that decision to leave them open for the heavy section. But certainly for this verse bit, I'm just going to leave them now because it's going to take too long. But I want to EQ the tom bus. So let's click on a channel, find the tom bus, and I'll tell you what we can do is listen to what frequencies are resonating whilst the rest of the kit is playing, whilst nothing's playing on the tom. All right, there's loads resonating. That's helping a bit. Now, obviously, the toms being quite low sounding instruments, a lot of the low end is resonating, but I think 200 is the main culprit. So at this point, maybe I'd go into each individual microphone and EQ them. But like I said, I'm just not going to bother doing that. I'm just going to manually gate all the drums and then kill two birds with one stone. Anyway, all the toms, sorry, not all the drums. But let's have a listen to how that EQ affects the toms themselves, because that might be where the... Sorry, press that space by accident. That might be the beautiful sound of the toms there that we've EQ'd out, so we don't want to do that. Now, I know from doing live sound for many years that the beautiful frequencies of most toms, and certainly this kit, so this is my Yamaha Hybrid Maple, which is a gorgeous sounding kit. A lot of the tom resonant, really nice resonant frequencies are about 125, 150, and a bit lower the further down the kit you get. So I'm hesitant to take any more of those out. But let's say be without, because that cleared the sound up instantly for me. Okay, Ron Vyas said he would use a linear phase multiband compressor to control that resonance. And okay, yep, that is that's not a bad shout. We could try that now. I'm just trying to think why I wouldn't do that normally. Yes, we could squash the okay, so multiband phase. I'm almost thinking we could. This is where we could use a dynamic EQ rather than a multiband compressor, unless we have a positive multiband compressor. So okay, you've got me thinking. Good shout, Ron. You've got me on this. I'm going to leave that in though, but we're going to go to, and this is totally improvised, the Fab Filter multiband EQ. But what I'm going to do is for this low frequency band, which I want to be between, about there, maybe a little narrower. What I'm going to do here is actually set, I'm going to squash those frequencies out using the multiband. But then when the toms hit, I want the multiband to release. So I want the range to go the other way. And this is where I'm probably more familiar with the dynamic EQ than this. Let's have a listen, see how that goes. Let's take out the EQ so we can hear that in effect. So without. All right. Yeah, Ron, good idea. Thanks for the suggestion. I like that. However, I'm hearing when it's coming in and out, when it's squashing the signal down. If I just use a linear EQ, it just gets rid of those frequencies and you don't have to worry about it. Okay, versus a dynamic EQ. Again, Fab Filter. Links for these plugins are in the description below, by the way. Purchasing through those links is a great way to support the channel if you're finding this live stream useful, which I hope you are. Thanks for joining for this long. Thanks for your suggestions, Ron. So Q3. And what frequency range are we working with about there? So I want to reduce this keep it there when it's playing, when the toms are playing, but reducing it when it's not playing, which means I probably need to sidechain it. But we're using multiple mics, so that's going to be tricky. Okay, so what we'll do is a positive What are we saying here? Okay, so this is going to duck these frequencies when there's nothing going through this EQ. Sorry, it's going to duck the frequencies when the toms aren't performing and then hopefully boost them when they are. Let's have a listen. I think I'd need to sidechain this, though, to get this effective. Because there's so many channels, I can't do that. Okay. And I believe that is the answer. That's working really well. Let's narrow that cue point a little bit. Focus on the frequencies that were bothering me. So a bit lower, 80. Yeah, I think I know what you mean, Ron. I'm just getting a little bit hungry, so my concentration's wavering. But I think that's doing what you meant, right? Where we're suppressing the low frequencies using the permanent curve, and then when the toms are becoming more prominent and those frequencies are becoming prominent with the toms, then it's boosting them back up. I think that's working quite nicely. There is another honk annoying me, though. Ooh. There we go. All right, so without... So just the dynamic EQ on the tom bus on its own. It's getting rid of that low end, but it's not getting rid of the middle stuff, which we could apply a dynamic EQ to, but I think between the two, it's working more effectively. Yeah, Ron, great shout. Thanks, mate. I like that. There's still a frequency bothering me there. I think it was a 300 one. All right, that's just multiple microphones causing havoc there. Cool, so we've got down the toms, hi-hats. I think this is where I did the relight, use the relight plugin again. Let's solo the hi-hats. And I know I've EQ'd these already quite heavily. I think we used an SM7B on the hi-hats on this session. I have since found the ultimate hi-hat microphone, which is the new Audix A133. I did what I thought was a really good video on this microphone. Very few people have watched it, but the distributor and Audix absolutely loved it. Thanks SVC Distribution and Audix for that mic. Unfortunately, I didn't get to keep it because I really want it. The more I used it, the more I fell in love with it. It's the perfect microphone on hi-hats. That's the Audix A133. This, however, was with an SM7B. So let's have a listen to the hats on its own. Oh, and I've panned these, so let's unpan that so we can hear it nicely. Let's find a groovy section as well. None of that. So that's my rip-off of the chorus of Fool in the Rain. At least that was my inspiration behind that drum beat, which is kind of a 4/3 shuffle through 16ths that lasts a bar. So I'm not the biggest fan of this mic on hi-hats. All right, so I've just pulled out some bits there. It's not doing too much. Let's put the relight on because I did have fun working with this earlier. And again, different saturation types. Too much cymbals on that one. That's pulling out the hi-hats quite a bit. Ooh, old school. Bit dark, bit dry. Quite neutral. Bit too much saturation on E, so I quite like C, but let's take that saturation back a bit. And again, in the context of a full mix. And while we're on the full mix, let's take out this multi-band EQ on the toms and listen to what we're getting with Ron's dynamic EQ idea. So without the tom bus processing, it's quite resonant. There's some low end going on there that's not really doing anything. It's just present. And then without, yeah. So, for example, that would work if I was just wanting to do a quick mix. But the reality is, when I release this track, I will go through and manually gate the toms all the way through. All right, overheads. I can't remember if these were Beyerdynamic M120s, Aston Origins, or Coles 4038s. I got a feeling they're the Astons. Right, so there's just a high pass filter on them. Now with overhead mics, I wouldn't high pass too high. For example, on the hi-hats, I think I high passed like way up here. I wouldn't necessarily do that on the overheads because I want the snare sound to come through the overheads. What a lot of people overlook with mixing is that so much of the snare drum sound is in the room and the room mics and the overhead mics. So I don't want to cut that out when the prominent frequencies that I like, at least in a snare, are at about 200, 250 hertz. And I don't think the overheads need much more to that. So I would take, if I was just mixing these on their own, I would take a bit of 500 out. However, again, we have to go back to context and bear in mind that I have done that on the drum bus, on the global bus mic. Rooms. Yeah, they're definitely a ribbon. I think they're the M120s, Beyerdynamics. Talkback mic was an SM57 to talk to Finn in the control room next to my head. And I think he ran this through... No, so he ran the room mics through his Fusion, I think, by the sounds of it. But I think he did something to this as well. That's just an extra mic. For example, the Talkback mic. The Talkback mic was at head position, which is quite a good place. For example, if you've only got two microphones, if you're trying to record a drum kit with a two input audio interface, you could do a kick drum dynamic mic, such as the Audix D6, my favorite, or the Shure Beta 52A. And then next to the drummer's head, or just above, you could use a condenser mic. The reason you'd put it next to the drummer's head is because if they're a half decent drummer, they're going to be playing the kit to the dynamics of the room. So if, for example, the snare's really loud in a room, they might be backing off that to get a good balance in their ears. So if you put a mic next to where their ears are, in theory, you should capture their concept of the best inter-kit dynamics, if that makes sense. That might be some proper drum nerdery for you. So that's what the Talkback mic was. We also had a U87 at the back of the room and a V67. Now, the U87 might have had a high-pass filter on. I can't remember. Finn suggested it might have. But this is a U87 versus the JZ V67. And for anyone who's watched the channel, you'll know that the JZ V67 is by far my favourite microphone in the world. The U87 obviously is a legendary mic for many reasons. Oh, sorry. Okay, so that sounds pretty good. Let's listen to the V67 in comparison. There's just a character to that. There's like a fizz that just sounds awesome on the V67. And that comes across on the vocals. The U87 is a very clear, smooth, even response, detailed microphone. So is the V67, but it's just got this character, which for my voice at least, my excuse for a voice, works really well. And it just sounds good as an overhead, as you can hear there. I could even pan those in different places maybe. Though that might skew the sound because they're going to be technically slightly sonically different sounds either way. Let's keep them central. Let's take the Talkback Mic down. Overheads we had down as well, didn't we? All right, so at this point, I'm going to group all the overheads and the room mics together by going to another bus, and we're going to call that cymbals. And I'm going to send the hi-hats to its own bus and call that hats for a reason I'll explain in a minute. Hats, like so. Michael says, how many mics did we use? I think we had like 20 mics on the kit. What did we have? Kick in, out, tunnel, snare top, snare bottom. Ooh, I forgot to talk about that. I'll come back to that. 6 on the toms, that's 11. Hats, 12. Overheads 13, 14, room 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So 19 mics on the kit, which is excessive. I'm using 16 in my studio now, and it sounds good. Obviously, the more mics you have, the more complicated a drum mix is because you've got everything going into more stuff. All right, so the reason I've just grouped those together to a bus, if we go to our mix window, is at the end, we have the kick bus, the snare bus, the tom bus. Can you guys see that underneath? Let me move that without going to OBS and faffing where my screen is. Kick bus, don't know what that is. Snare bus, tom bus, cymbals, and hi-hats. So basically what I can do now if I want to change, the level of the kick drums is just move the fader. And that moves all kick drums, all 3 kick drum mics at the same time. Snare bus moves both snare mics at the same time. Tom bus now moves all 6. Well, it moves the level of all 6 mics. It doesn't obviously move individual channels. It moves the entire level. So instead of mixing with, potentially 19 drum mics, we're now only mixing with kick, snare, tom, cymbals, and hats. So we've got 5 channels to mix with. Then all of these will be then going to drum bus 1 on the output. So just to go through the instrument tree again there, I've got a master drum bus, which is this one here. A little bit of drum bus processing. That is getting fed by a bass drum bus, which is all 3 kick mics going to the bass drum bus. It's getting fed by the tom bus, which is both tom mics going to the snare mics going to the snare bus. 6 tom mics going to the tom bus. The hi-hats going on their own to the hi-hat bus, and all the overheads and room mics going to the cymbal bus. So there's 5 buses then going to the drum bus. So as long as you keep those at unity, they're not really going to affect the outcome of the drum bus as we've gain staged it and processed it already. I hope that makes sense to everyone. At the Source Studios wants to try Pultec on the drum bus. Good shout. Let's do it. Before we do that, let me just recap what I've done. So I've bussed everything individually. Parallel. Okay, right. So yeah, let's go back to the drum bus because there's a couple of things I want to do here. So this is the drum bus with the Loch Ness Smash Crust Saturation plugin with a tiny bit of EQ. Go away. And let's bring back in the Black Q V2, whatever saturator that is. Tube saturator. And let's solo. And this raises a very good point. A lot of people will send all the effects to another bus. So once I've got my drum bus, I'm then going to have a guitar bus and a keyboard bus and a bass bus and a vocal bus and a backing vocal bus. And some people will go as far to having an effects bus as well. I will then send the drums, bass, guitars, keyboards, all the instruments to a global music bus, which I'll probably explain in another live session later, and then all the vocals to another bus so I can process them separately and for sidechain EQ purposes. And then I would have a third one, potentially. Some people do that. I actually haven't done this yet. But some people will then send all the effects to another bus, and that would help me now, because instead of having to go to the snare drum to get all these reverbs out, which are now not, okay. So maybe what I need to do is send all the reverbs. All right, let's do that. So basically what I was having to do is solo the reverbs as well for the snare, but we don't need to do that. We can get around that by sending all the reverbs to the drum bus. However, that is then going to be processed by the drum bus processing. So you may or may not wish to do that. I'm going to do that now for simplicity, just so everything's in one place and we can hear it by just soloing the one drum bus channel. However, you may not want all the snare drum reverbs and the tom reverbs to be processed by the drum bus processing, so you would send it to a separate bus send. I hope that makes sense. At the Source says, is Loch Ness like a 76 style comp or not? I think it's more of an opto, so more like an LA2A. Let's just check if the reverbs have worked. Yes, so the reverbs are now coming through the drum bus, which is good. And back to the drum bus to check out the Loch Ness. I mean, Loch Ness is, I think it's more of an opto than a 76 style compressor. It certainly doesn't sound too quick, but we could have a listen. So that's no compression. So, I mean, I can't remember if I've seen anywhere in the Tone Empire literature that says what kind of compressor that's modelled on. I think it's somewhere in between listening to it. But it does sound, it's got similar tendencies to the EL8 Distressor from Universal Audio, which I love, so that's great. Michael says, so instruments to sub-buses to group buses to master. Yes, pretty much. So drum mics, kick drum mics, for example, to the kick drum bus, to the global drum bus, to actually potentially a music bus before the master bus. Gets complicated. I'll tell you who does a really good explanation of bus layering is Mike Enjo at Creative Source. Does anybody follow Mike at Creative Source? Mike's a good friend of mine. He's an absolute legend. He's a dude of a guy. And if you use Cakewalk by BandLab, he's the guy to follow on YouTube for tutorials and everything you need to know about that. And his product reviews are wonderful. Big up to Mike. The other thing we were going to do with this was put a Pultec on. Let's put a Pultec. Does Tone Empire have a Pultec? No. So we're going to go for the Universal Audio Pultec, which is just, I mean, it's the one. Pultec EQP18. Let's go for the original. I usually dive in for, could try some different presets. I go for mix air and low end. and I dialed it back to about 2 at 30 hertz. But on the drum bus, let's add some 60 hertz for some punch. And at the top end, I quite like 10K for cymbals, which gives it a nice glassy sound. But that might be too much at 6, so let's dial that back a little bit. So this is boosting 60 hertz and 10K. All right, sorry if that's getting quite loud. I am pushing the drum bus there with this. So a bit too much in the top end there. That was getting a little fizzy. Let's try that at 8. 8K. Yeah, I think I preferred it. So yeah, adding a Pultec is an idea. I mean, I think that's getting a little unruly for me. I wouldn't put a Pultec on the drum bus yet. I've got one on the master bus, actually. Let's see what that's doing. Let's just turn that off. So that's, yeah, like doing a bit of really low end and a bit of high top end. I mean, that is pretty, that's pretty good. Let's increase the bandwidths of those. Yeah, cool. Good shout. I do quite like that, but it's now just a little hot. So I want to take the output back a touch on the Loch Ness. Right. And as always, we need to listen to this in the context of a mix. So like I said at the top of the show, this has been roughly mixed already. And if you want to check out what I've done, the first of these live streams, which is episode 1, was an umbrella overview of this entire session and what I've done and how I've set up the session. So you can hear and see in that video what I've done to the bass, the guitars and the keys and vocals, etc. already. So let's have a listen to the mixing we've done on the drums in the context of the full mix. And those guitars are really loud. Why have they gone so loud? Ah, okay, that's because I've sent them to... Yeah, ignore that. So they were going to a reverb, and now they're going to a bus, which is set to 0 on the output, so that's why they're louder. Much better. And there's loads of reverb on the vocals. So in terms of how that's sounding in a mix, I'm feeling like it's slightly muddy. Bloody guitar, why is that soloing when they're soloing? Because that's getting routed to... Oh yeah, just put that back in. There we go. All right, stay tuned for next week when... I'm not leaving yet, by the way. Just stay tuned for next week when I'll be mixing the bass. As you can see, I've done a few things already to that, but I'll be going into more detail, mixing the bass with the kick drum and the snare drum, because that influences the bass as well. One more thing to do with the drums is to go through the 2 sends that I've got with the drum kit. A couple of comments. 30 hertz sounds good. Yeah, 10Ks. Good shout on the cymbals. For your drums, are you recording anything with your analog hardware before processing? Good shout, exemption. And I'm going to bring up a little video screen a picture slideshow of equipment that we used in Finn's studio. And hopefully you can still hear me. So, yeah, we had the overheads going through the SSL Fusion there. Kick and snare, I think, went through those Neves. And then Finn's got some API stuff. Oh, that's going way too quick, isn't it? You get the idea. That yeah, there's some API preamps there. The Neve preamps. There's some API EQs. I think there's a couple of Chandlers in there. And then ultimately, the rest of the mics were going through the Audient ASP 800s, I think is what Finn's got, and then into the Apollos. All right. Back in the room. So the last couple of things with the drums that I've done is I've sent a drum bus reverb. You might be thinking, why? You've got a snare reverb. And this is just for when I'm kind of recording other stuff and I want a bit of ambience on the drums. I'll put the drums on a drum bus reverb. But let's listen to what we've done. Now, I've got the Pro R EQ there. I don't get on with this plugin because I don't know how to use it. I'll be honest. It's not their fault. It's probably my fault. But let's... Ooh, I did find a really good one. I'll tell you what I found for this. So we are going to send the entire drum bus now to a reverb. And Universal Audio, which one is it? It's either Capital Chambers. They have a great plugin for this. No, it's not that one. It is Ocean Studios, Ocean Way. Ocean Way Studios. Right. This is a killer reverb plugin for drum buses. Start with a preset. Oh, God, they don't make sense to me. Remic. Reverb. Just go for a reverb one. Right. Okay, so this is going to be, I've got the entire drum bus now with a slight EQ on the reverb channel. This bus 2 there is a reverb, so I've got a slight EQ on that. And we can dial in more of that potentially. So what we've got on the screen here, let's see if I can zoom in on that. No. We've got the placement of the kit here, and then the first set of room mics, and then the second set and the third set. That's giving almost a delay effect, but it's capturing the space in the room. Now, I was at Abbey Road once recording, I was drum teching for a band, and they asked me to sound check, and I had a very surreal moment where I was playing drums in Studio 2 to an empty Studio 2 on this DW kit that sounded average, to say the least. I was thinking I could have bought a better kit than this. And I went into the control, and I was playing for maybe half an hour, the same groove. And I went into the control room, and then the guy brought up the kick mics and the snare mics. I think there were 2 on each. And the hi-hat mics, and I thought, yeah, okay, great, sounds fine, sounds like a kit, but I wasn't really impressed. Bear in mind, it's going through the huge, whatever desk they've got in Studio 2 these days. And then he brought up the overheads, and I was like, okay, that sounds good. And then they brought up the first set of room mics, which I think were 2 meters ahead of the kit. And I was like, okay, that's starting to sound big. And then the next set of mics, I think, were another 2 meters ahead of that, but 2 meters up in the air. Maybe even 3 meters up in the air. And I thought, okay, that's starting to sound huge. And then the third set of room mics, which is what this plugin is emulating, was like right at the back of the room, maybe 6 meters ahead of the kit, and also 5 meters up in the air or something stupid. Studio 2 at Abbey Road is humongous. Studio 1's even bigger, obviously. But the magic of that place is when they bring in all the room mics. So I went from thinking, it's all right, to, oh my goodness, that's the Abbey Road sound. And this does a good job of creating a similar reverb ambient technique. Now, the great thing about this plugin is we can EQ each channel and mix each one in, pan the balance, the phase, the high pass, low pass filters, the distance from the kit. So let's take that back one even further away, for example. Let's mute them all for now. Oh, and let's put the send up to 0 so we can hear it. Whoa. Yeah, so, and then we need to adjust the gain. So this is a low shelf I'm playing with here because the bottom end's a little unruly. And you can boost that, cut that, whatever. I'm just going to leave all that flat and bring it back a bit, but that adds some girth. And then we've got the next mic in, which is halfway between the room. And the close mic. Whoa. So you can really hear the effect of how each mic is affecting the overall EQ of the kit there. That's definitely quite prominent here. So quite evident, sorry. So I would possibly curtail some more frequencies. So what this is doing is making the kit sound huge. Let's A, B with and without. But it's a bit too much, so I'm going to just dial it in, and I might just check the phase on those. Yeah, I'm going to reload that because I think that might have been phase aligned and I've just taken some of those mics out of phase. All right, just give me 1 second. Hello? Are you mid-record? Yeah. Don't worry. All right, excuse that. So that might be a bit too much on the go. Let's blend it in. So that's getting a little yeah, that's all right. I mean, I'd probably go through now and tweak some of the low end shelf there. Let's put the low end. It's a shame I can't see what frequency that is. Maybe I can in editor controls. No. Ooh. Okay, let's not try that. Remote view. All right, so I was just trying to see if I could find a view to find the exact frequency. I can drop the low end off there, but I'm just going to guess that is, if that's 1,000, I'm going to guess that's about 500 and just dip a little bit out of that. I'm going to leave that. Let's dial that back slightly in the bus and move on to the other bus, and then we should round this off. No phase problems, I don't think so. Are you using this on your overall drum bus? Sounds nice. Yes, exemption. So this parallel bus is a reverb on the overall drum bus. Yep, good question. And the next bus is a parallel drum bus. What have I done here? So I've just used the Empirical Labs and I've squashed it. I've used the nuke setting, which is fun. Let's listen to the parallel drum bus on its own. Cool, so that's squashing the life out of the parallel send, and then we're going to blend this in. I've set the send to 0, and we'll blend that in with the main drum bus. And by soloing the main drum bus there, that will solo the drum parallel. Or will it? No, it won't, because that's going to drum output. Yeah, it's going to the output. So it will. Whoa. So without the drum parallel drum bus, and with. Now obviously we're effectively bringing in another channel of audio, so it can start to get quite loud if you start doing this. So that's why you need, with the drum buses, to give yourself plenty of headroom. So each instrument bus, for example, the kick bus, we need to keep an eye on the headroom so that ultimately when we get to the drum bus, we have headroom that we can play around with parallel buses. Now, I don't know if you can hear that, but there's a slap happening there somewhere. Anyway, we're at minus 5.8 for the drum bus. That's after processing. So plenty of processing has gone on there. Plenty of level increases has gone on with different bits of compression, the parallel reverb and the parallel compression. So 5.8 for the overall mix. I'm not too worried. Now, the master is going to minus 2, which doesn't give us much headroom. So what I can do here is find the offending instrument channel or just pull the entire bus back. Now, the good thing about pulling the entire bus back is it doesn't affect any compression in the chain so far, besides the compression on the master output, which I would always check with and without anyway at the final stage of the mixing process. So if I want to reduce how much the drum bus is hitting the master out, I'm just going to pull the fader down, and that's easy. And there we go. We're at minus 5, which, you know, might be a little bit hot still. So again, what I might need to do at some point is just go in and take these levels down a little bit, but I don't want to do that now. I'm aware it's a little bit late to do that because I have gain staged everything, possibly a little bit too hot, I have to admit. But all the bus processing stages are now gain staged with those levels in mind for the compression. So I don't want to go back, but backing off compression is never a bad thing. I'm not going to do that right now. So any more comments in the house? Click the master EQ button on the plugin. Hi Shelton. Sorry, these comments aren't particularly quick or up to speed, so I might have missed which plugin you're referring to there. Just give me a shout with that one. All right, so drums. Now I can go through and mute all the drum processing we've done, but that's going to take days. Maybe I can do that on the channel output. All right, so I'm giving you a before and after is going to involve some serious muting, so I'm not going to bother doing that. But let's have another listen. Let's go for that tom bit as well and hear what we've done so far. I'm thinking that parallel sends a little hot. Yeah, the snare compression's a bit hot as well, because it's really bringing out those buzz rolls in the groove. A bit too much for my liking. Let's back that off a bit. Yeah, that's something I'll faff around with in the final mix. Anyway, in context, that's more important. Do we want to hear some vocals? Let's go from the beginning. So, full drum mix in context. Like I said earlier, the things I would still do to this that I'm not going to do is probably manually gate all the toms. Manually gate the bits, like the first verse, there's no drums, so I would go in and slice these and have a fade out, and then slice just before they come in and have a fade in, etc. Do I need to do anything at the end? No, I've done that already. All right, I'll have a listen, and then we can have a listen, and then I'll have a think what else I would need to do. Exemption says, Ableton user, just trying to get my head around how you're routing your drum bus and groups, etc., but I think I can tell what you're doing. Okay, so just a reminder, my basic process is top-down mixing. So what I've done in this session is gone into each... why is that making noise? Interesting. I've gone into each microphone and why is there noise coming through that channel? Strange. So what I've done is basically a top-down approach. So in this session, I've gone into each microphone and I've tweaked them slightly. But what I did first was I was on the master bus and I got all the tracks together and listened to those and then applied a tiny bit of dynamic EQ, tiny bit of multiband EQ, a bit of a Pultec for some low-end and top-end air and sheen, a precision stereo widening plugin, a tiny bit of compression from the from this Neve, whatever that number is, compressor, which is delightful. A tiny bit more EQ, just doing the barest amount, and then a limiter. And then from that, I'm then thinking, right, what needs working on? So then I've gone to the drum bus and I've added in the Loch Ness Smash and Crust, which is a compressor and a saturator. And then I have put in some EQ. Now what I should do is try that the other way around, because the EQ affects the compressor. So if I'm taking frequencies out, that mean the compressor might not be working so hard if those prominent frequencies were hitting the compressor. And then I've got whatever processing there, some saturation. So imagine we've got output level. I would then go music bus level. And on the music bus, I would have all the instruments. First of which is the drum bus, which we've got here. Then underneath the drum bus, I've got all 3 kick drums going into a kick bus, which I can bring up here like that. And then the kick bus, so that's all 3 kick drum mics, so I don't have to go in and EQ each one of them. I've just done a bit of compression to that. And I could have EQ'd that as well, so I didn't have to go in and EQ all 3. But because they're 3 very different sounding mics, I did go in and EQ them all individually in this session. And then I've got my snare buses, snare mics, sorry, they're going to a snare bus. And then they're all going to the drum bus. So it's master bus, music bus, instrument buses, in this case drum bus, then it's kick drum buses and snare bus and tom bus, etc. And then it's the individual microphones. So there's quite a few levels of buses going on. And then with the kicks, I've just done a bit of EQ on individual mics, like as we've done in this live stream. I hope that makes sense to the overall process. And I did think of something else I need to talk about quickly, which is the snare, this snare top. So what I did here was I've sampled the snare drum, but I'm not using the sample. How to sample the snare drum in Logic is just click on the channel strip there, go to track, or is it edit? I always forget. And there we go. Replace or double drum track. And that will give you the option to pull up a Logic stock sample and set it to snare drum, set the threshold that it samples at, and you'll see it's getting all these backbeats. And yeah, and it's missing out these buzz rolls in between. Now, the reason I'm doing that and not using it is because I've actually got this side chain, effectively side chain to the reverb. So as you can hear with the snare reverb, any kind of miss hit, the sound of that miss hit is amplified by the reverb. So if you can use a sample that is a perfectly triggered metronomic sound, not the placement, that's obviously dictated by the actual snare hit, but the sound, then you can trigger the reverb off that. And the way to do that is to set up a bus. Let's just set up a new one, 30, and then we're going to set it as pre-fader, which is what I've done on this one. Set it to 0 and click on 30, and then so this is going to be sample snare rev, for example. Now I've already got one, so I'm just going to undo that. So I've already got this one here, which is going to snare drum long. Let's solo that and see what that's doing. So you can see there's no level coming out. So if I bring in the sample, you get that really kind of crappy snare sound, which I don't want. It's not a good sounding sample. However, its purpose is to trigger the reverb, which I've got going pre-fader, so I can have the sample down. Let's mute the snare drum send, because I think this was going to bus is that? Snare shorts. Interesting. What have I done there? Aha. Right. I've reassigned those somehow to something that shouldn't have been there. That's the one that needed to go to drum bus. Forgive me. And that's the one that needed to go to drum bus. All right, just correcting a mistake I made earlier. That's where buses can get fusing. So if I mute the snare drum going to bus 17, which is the long reverb, I'll mute the other reverbs as well. So that horrible sounding high-pitched, kind of quite heavily pre-delayed reverb there is coming off the sample, not off the snare drum itself. Now, the samples I've got at the moment have got Logic's humanizer thing on, so they are actually fluctuating a little bit. I would have to go through, find the MIDI, and then figure out how I can transform those into perfectly identical notes. I'm not going to do that now, though, but there must be a way of doing that. So that the reverb is identical, so the reverb isn't accentuating the fluctuation in snare drum hits. But for now, let's turn that off and bring this snare drum back to bus 17, which was the long reverb. All right, let's have a listen to all of that in the context of the mix, and I'll think if there's anything else we need to talk about. Any questions, anybody, before we go? Thank you for sticking around this long. That's been a live session, twice the length I thought it would be. Sorry for the disaster at the beginning, for those who were there. Thanks for supporting the channel. You guys are great. I will try and get 1 or 2 clips out of this video on Saturday mornings. This is now going to be Saturday afternoons. I'm going to release basically like a short tutorial clip from this live stream that is hopefully useful. There's a few of those on the channel already.
I saw an angel by my side with tears from heaven as she cried. I saw reflection in those eyes like a ghost in the night while we were dancing.
I will say these are demo vocals. And muted vocals as well.
Take me by the hand and lead me out into the night in this world.
That long snare reverb is very mechanical.
I saw a demon.
Nope. That's just ruined it, hasn't it?
I saw a demon by your side, immerse you in the anguish of your pride. I saw 2 colors.
All right, so it's the gated reverb on the snare I'm not digging.
Catch the shadows of heaven, my heart was breaking. Will you take me by surprise? Will you take my breath away? Will you take me by the hand and lead me out into the night in this world? In this world. Night, I only see you walking with the angels. With this.
All right, so those drums need tweaking. I can't quite put my finger on what's happening there. It's just getting a bit muddy. Probably too many layers of compression. I will need to go in and back some of those off, perhaps. What we need to do is try EQ before the Loch Ness and EQ after. So this is as it was earlier, after. Yeah, it's definitely those snare reverbs, isn't it, causing that mush? And this is the EQ before. That sounds cleaner. Which reverb don't we like the most? Yeah, that's far too hot in the mix. And there's some serious compression. There's too much compression going on there. Let's back the smash back a bit. Let's take the parallel. No, that's quite down far enough already. Maybe it's the snare compression. Yes. All right, and the snare compression there will be what's bringing out the little buzz strokes. So backing that off was a good find. Cool. Let's keep them. Look at some comments. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Exemption. Thanks, At the Studios. Thanks, Shelton. Thanks to everyone who's joined. Too long a tail on the reverb. Yes, I would agree. Too bright too. At the source, do you mean the overall mix or the drum bus is too bright? Now, what I will say about that is, at the moment, I'm mixing just through my Sennheiser HD 600s, which are reasonably flat, but they're not perfectly flat. I would need to reference these with Sonarworks on to flatten them, and then I'd reference them on different systems. So I've just got used to these with these headphones for the last 2 hours. So you might be right. Like I said, I would have to reference. Let's have another listen. Those strings are loud, but how good do they sound? All right, that's going to be a fun session, mixing those in. Yeah, I know what you mean about the high end on the drum bus. Yeah, that's something I'd probably tweak right towards the end of the mix when everything else is kind of mixed and balanced. For me, they're just sounding a bit squashed. I've overcompressed those at some point. Yeah, we'll have to go back and check those out. Cool. Are the verbs too bright? Reverb's too bright. On the vocals or on what exactly? And then maybe we can have a look at that. So content coming up, guys. I've got a review of the Blacklion audio interface Revolution coming up. That's an interesting one. There's good and bad things to say about that, which I'm quite honest about in the video I've been filming today. I've got a review of the Austrian audio microphones coming up. Those are incredible. Those are currently my room mics in front of me. Like I said, on Saturday afternoon, there's going to be a new clips session from last week's live session. And then there's going to be another live stream next Wednesday. I think we're going to mix the bass in next Wednesday's live stream a little bit more than we have done because it's slightly disappearing in the mix there. Kit could maybe use a high shelf. Positive EQ on that, and the snare reverb too bright. All right, we could look at that now. This is going to be my longest live stream ever. Wait, let's find the EQ. Now, which reverb has got the bright snare on? I'm going to guess the gated one because that's got the boost in. Let's take that back. Ooh, yep, good shout, very good shout. And the other one was kick needs a bit of top end, bit of high shelf. So let's go to the kick bus. And this is the beauty of busing stuff. I don't have to go in and do everything. Yeah, another great suggestion. Thank you at the Source Studios. Let me know your real name, by the way, and feel free to let me know any of your real names. Just before we go, where is everybody from? I'm in London. Where are you guys listening from? The Black Lion 500 series preamp I thought was a little too clean for my taste, but still nice. Okay. And Exemption says, Ed, would you recommend your WA73 EQ, and can you use the EQ independently from the preamp? You can't use the EQ independently from the preamp. It's rooted in series. Let me just double check that though. Actually, you could use the EQ independently by using the insert return, which comes in, I think, after the preamp, but before the EQ. So yeah, you could use the WA73, just the EQ, but I'll be honest, the EQ's not amazing on it. There's not many occasions when I use it, actually. I really like the preamp. Anything above 100 hertz is good. Below 100 hertz, and it just starts doing strange things, in my opinion, at least in comparison to a Neve. Obviously, one's 4 times the cost. But yeah, the top end of the EQ does slightly funny things. It just sounds very fizzy and a little uncomfortable a bit too quickly, again, compared to a Neve, which isn't as harsh. But it's not a dissimilar sound. All right, London and Sutton. Holland, Chicago, awesome. Could run the insert return right. Yes, yeah, referring to the WA73. Yes, yeah, that's what I would do. But like I said, it's not the greatest EQ. I'd probably go for a standalone EQ. I've heard really good things about the WAPQ1, whatever the warm audio version of the Pultec EQ is. I've heard that's supposed to be really good. Right, guys, it's getting late. I need to go home and get some dinner. It's been emotional. Thanks for sticking with me through this session. Like I said, hopefully I'll get some clips out of this to stagger release at some point for tutorial purposes. Thanks for watching. Be kind to one another. Stay safe. The pandemic's not quite over yet. Let me go to full mode. There we go. I can see you properly. Or you can see me properly. Yeah, stay safe. Look after one another. Thanks for watching. Subscribe below if you haven't already. Feel free to click the links for the plugins in the description below. Like I said, the awesome Tone Empire plugins. Check those guys out. 15-day trial if you haven't already. They're really good plugins. And the links below are affiliate links, so I do make a small commission if you purchase through those, which is very kind and helps keep me employed and alive. But gigs are picking up now, which is great. Anyway, on that lovely note, it's been emotional. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Wednesday where we'll be mixing the bass guitar. Thanks, guys.